I'm not a real stand behind the podium kind of guy, so if I start to wander, don't worry, it's kind of as needed. So I'm here to talk a little bit about our Ohio Precision Ag Initiative that we've been working with some landowners here in Ohio using AgSolver's Profit Zone Manager as an analysis tool to show us some of the whole farm analysis to identify areas that the farmer is just not being productive on, and then to come up with working with them to look at a lot of different scenarios to help the farmer be more productive. Some of those areas and practices end up being with conservation related, some are not, so we're going to kind of go through a little bit of the precision ag stuff and then talk about how we utilize those for some of the conservation practices that you've seen already here in the previous couple programs. So first off, I mean, when we're talking about precision ag, everybody's kind of got a different definition of what precision ag is to them. So for me, it's simply an acre by acre approach to farming. You need to treat and look at every acre as its own almost business, so to speak. So you want to make every little acre profitable that you have. So we can look at it as on return investment. We're talking about bushels, but either way you want to go, if you're putting $1 in, you should be expecting at least $1 out. So we're in, as everybody in this room probably knows, we're in a little bit of a down cycle. So right now, net farm income is down 38%, which is the largest decline since 1983. But at the same time, as everybody knows, our input costs are still pretty high. So we've really got to maximize where those inputs are going. So one way to do that is using a precision ag business planning cycle where we target areas through working with the farmer, CCAs, agronomists, or other precision ag specialists where we get a lot of those revenue producing acres that they're doing good on, producing good crops and good numbers. But we want to look at those areas that are not so good, areas that's break even or they're looking at losses, and try to identify what potential practices or alternative farming methods we might be able to use in those areas to then either work through your NRCS office with some of their programs or even your agronomist or your CCA about different strategies where we can take those negative return acres and make them positive, because this is about trying to make every acre positive. So there was a paper that just came out in or last January that talked about using precision ag, and it typically was pretty neat because it talked about using those subfield management practices, that acre by acre approach, how it could be profitable, helps managers shore up their profitability by identifying and making sure that those inputs are going specifically where they need to go. Oops, gotta go back one, sorry. And we're not introducing new technology or trying to get you to buy something. It's information that you are already using and collecting on a daily basis and probably have been for many years while you're out at harvest. You can also use some of the new technology for the as planted and as applied data to look at it. But I mean, most people in this room know what a yield monitor looks like, and that's essentially what we're going to focus on, looking at those on multi-years to identify those historically unproductive acres. We're not talking about a 1 year, one bad year, one good year. We're looking at it as over a whole 3 to 5 years. Minimum, sorry. And there's also been some papers out there that have talked about using yield monitor-based strategies. And what we've also found is it's typically identifying those areas that are waterlogged, they're poor soil quality, or the highest environmental risk. A lot of times you can think real quick, where would that be? Streams, wetlands, along the edge of the field. Those are the low-hanging fruit that's typically easy to identify. But you can also look at areas that are scattered out through the field. Some of those depressional areas that we've heard about, the first one where they took away the wasp cobs and then just did them as the blind inlets. Those are all different areas that we can look at identifying that are potential low productions and work to get those back to better production. So every field has problem spots. I mean, we can typically see, we're out there, we plant it, we go through it, but in the end, nothing comes out because it's either waterlogged, saturated, it's poor soil quality, or it floods regularly. Shading along the edges of wood edges and fence lines. I mean, we all know what this looks like. It just doesn't grow. It's competitive with shade. Then you have deer or wildlife type stuff. It can't handle the stress because it's already stressed, so you get production like that, those first 12 to 16 rows. So what we did is we worked with OSU, the Molly Callan Ag Farm, which is there at Farm Science Review. Nate is here with OSU, and he's going to talk here in a second kind of about the process. But they were going through and kind of using their own strategy at looking at their yield monitors and had identified a break-even point for harvest production. And once they went through and identified all those areas that fell below that bushel per acre yield for them, they said, what can we do in these areas? And so they were working with me just on what might be options through CRP. They already have some out there through filter strips, so we were looking at it. So this was about the time that we started working with AgSolver using Profit Zone Manager. So they were kind enough to upload their data, and we ran a whole field or a whole farm analysis. And essentially this is what it is. Those there in the orange are all the fields that we looked at and ran the analysis on. They gave us specific inputs to their farm. This isn't an average. This is what dollars they spent for that year, for that crop, or for that field. And so this is where this program differs a little bit from some of the other ones that we've looked at or used, is because it's precise to your farm. As detailed as you are on your record keeping, on your inputs, that's the information that you're going to get out of it. Oops, there we go. So this is one of the fields we looked at, and this is typically of what will happen is when you populate it, it comes out from the information that you put in it, and you can see greens and reds and oranges and yellows. But it also gives us this, which is a bar graph on the bottom right-hand corner, and then they give you a breakdown, ROI, your total inputs, your total revenue, and everything like that, so you can see dollar for dollar. So the bar graph to me is specifically interesting because it gives me the actual number of acres at that dollar. So you can see how many acres I have in those yellow, reds, and orange. That's a little bit different than just looking at the yield monitor. It's actually counting those pixels for you. So we can look at this field under a lot of different scenarios or the way to get the information. So this one right here is ROI. So in those areas that's coming out there, in the green, it was 25% return on investment, and if you go down the other way, it's negative 25% return on investment. So typically, everybody knows, put in $1, get $1.25 back per acre, or if I put in $1, I get $1.25. That's your 25%, and then the other way. Another way we can look at this is what's the break-even yield increase. So what do I have to do? How much do I have to increase my yield just to break even? And some of those numbers are 106 bushels. I don't know of an agronomic process that I know of right now that I can increase 106 bushels. So that was one of the ways we looked at what potentially could be out there. Another one we can look at is the break-even expense decrease. So in those same areas that I'd have to increase my yield $106, I'd have to decrease my inputs by $650. Again, I don't know of a hybrid that can help me do that. I don't know of a technique. So we definitely have some problem areas out here that we want to address. So what we do is we go through and where those areas are that we identify, which is the red areas along the wood edge, which everybody can typically say that's a north side of a woods, so we know what goes on there with the shading. And we create a polygon for it. And then we re-put different inputs in. So for this situation, we were looking under a quail border conservation program. So once we had the acres identified, we figured out what the seed would cost to put it in, what the maintenance would be, what the rental payment from the NRCS office and FSA would be for those. And we put that into the new budget to give us new numbers. And again, the only thing I want to stress is I know in previous talks, or a lot of times we look at it is we're taking acres out of production. I would disagree. You're still producing a commodity or a crop. It may be grass or pollinators or something different. You're still getting paid for that on a annual basis. So you've got to look at it is production for me. It is a commodity, and I need to take ownership of it. But you can see all those reds and yellows are gone. We've identified the area. We put a new budget with it. That could be potentially what the field would look like going forward with the same numbers. So what we'll do is we'll compare the old scenario and the new scenario, and there they are side by side as far as the picture. And then here we're going to look at the dollar numbers. I got to move over here. It's too much of a glare. Can everybody still hear me? I'm sure. So one of the things I want to point out is by doing this and identifying these areas, finding out strategies to put them in or to make dollars off of them, you're not only just addressing that for this year. you're building equity in your farm and in your fields, because that's a 227.1 bushel per acre cornfield before we looked and removed some of those reds and yellows and oranges. It then became a 234 bushel per acre farm for corn that year, because we're taking away all those things that are drawing my average down. Well, for you guys that use insurance and stuff and everything, you know it's based off of what your average yield is that's getting reported and going that way. So you're building equity by addressing these areas and trying to make them profitable, which also then goes into, at the end of this, you can print off like a financial form, essentially a profit and loss. So if you're looking at getting maybe a different planter so you can do variable rate planting or different things, you can take that to the bank and show them I'm addressing these issues, these losses, and building equity into it, and it may help you that way as well. So this is what we ended up doing out there at Molly Caron. Ended up looking at 35.5 acres that went into quail borders, and then we had the banana field. It really didn't have much going on at all, so it ended up all going into pheasant safe, which is a whole field CRP practice. So I'm just going to give Nate here with OSU, they're out there at the farm, just a minute or two to talk about the process and how it worked out for them.
Thanks, Mike. I really don't need to say much because Mike covered it pretty well. The couple of things I was going to mention, he hit. For us, it started in 2014. We wanted to look at things a little different. Profitability was going to become a focus. We saw that moving forward. So we had really good yield maps for, in some cases, up to 10 years. And every year we would just kind of look at those yield maps and we'd say, okay, these were high yielding areas, these were low yielding areas, but we didn't know what else to do with them. So we decided we need to look at profitability. What we thought at first was going to be whole fields. So we knew we had some fields on the farm that were going to be really profitable and some that were going to be either closer to break even or potentially negative. And that banana field, as he mentioned, is one that was typically negative. What we didn't realize is how far we could take that. We could actually look at it in zones per field. So that was encouraging. We started our own process with a break even per bushel where we could take that yield map and say, okay, anything over 40 bushels was profitable. And it's simply your cost per acre, and everybody can do this. You take your cost per acre on each enterprise, corn or soybeans, whatever you choose, and your potential price. You divide those two, and that gives you that bushel that you can start to look at. Okay, these areas that are over 40 bushel are my profit areas. So the Ag Solver program really takes the guesswork out of it. It makes it so simple. We had that yield data. We had it archived, and then yield data at the end of the year we just bring in. You zip it. You send it off in a link. Someone in Ag Solver processes that. They let you know when it's done. You log in. This thing is web-based, so it's really user-friendly. You don't have to have it on a specific computer. You can access it from your iPad. You can access it from the office computer. That was a nice feature to it. And then those polygons are identified super nice. The one that he had mentioned is the same one that's down here on the signs. We were looking for the low-hanging fruit at first, and I think we'll continue to build on that. But certainly the ones that were along the mature wood edges, and these are 130 foot tall mature trees, and were shaded out 150 feet or more. So we needed to look at options at programs, and as he said, we participated in 2006 in the CREP program with the cut ground and Scioto watershed, and the CRP programs that were offered in the pheasant safe and the 12 borders just seemed to make sense for us. The Farm Science Review farm operation is an earnings operation, so we don't get any general funding from the state level or the university, no academic funds, anything like that. So the money on the farm is earned right there on the farm from the crop enterprises. So profitability is important to us. We looked at those options, made the decision to enroll the acres, and I think moving forward, the next thing we'll look at is probably some of those other spots you see. In some cases, they're larger and they're out in the middle of the field. Those may be areas now that we work on. Maybe it's a total input reduction where we can now get those into more profitable areas. So those were my thoughts, and like I said, Mike, he really covered it pretty well. So.
All right, well, we'll keep going then. So again, when we're looking at this, look at that land unit, which I'm looking at as a per acre. It's really its own enterprise, so you've got to look at it agronomically, do risk management. what your operation is financially. And then, conservation is a potential, but it's not always the right answer. But if it is, then hopefully it works out. And then we go into that again, back to, again, if you're putting $1 in, you should be getting at least $1 out. But it is more than just CRP. We've had people put it into forage production, pasture. Some guys are growing cover crops on it. It's not typically corn and bean ground, but yet they can grow their clover or whatever else they might be using to go back into their fields if they're in a cover crop program. So that's something to think about. Small grain or different alternative markets. But it is you're still growing something on every acre. We can break these out, square off your fields, build them based off of your equipment size to reduce turn points, turn rows, and size. So whenever you have it, to make it very, very easy for you to farm, like that's straightening up the edge of a field, but it's taking out that just off that riparian corridor that typically floods. Same thing out there. There's lots of many practices, but we've squared those off based off of their planters going back and forth. So it very is user friendly. But for conservation and or farm income, one thing to think about: 6 to 15% of every farm has break-even or negative acres. And then last year alone, that accounted to 6.2 million acres, or 27.2% of the total crop acreage was break-even or negative. That's a huge number. We identify some of these areas and make them profitable. Again, it's better for the farmer, but it also is for everybody else. And again, on the back end, of course, yeah, this is potentially going to be conservation acres, so it's good for wildlife habitat, but it's not a CRP. Again, going to alternative crops could give value for wildlife at different points. So again, it's looking at areas like this along these fence rows, taking a look of something like that out. We all know about the bee issue. We all know about monarch butterflies. We're also doing a lot for those areas as well. There's a foreign one, something that looks like that, which is just, it's healthier, it's nice to look at. And also, I'm sure everybody has grandkids, or, a lot of people are turning some of these areas that are also being profitable for them through hunting and other different type of operations. So we're going to switch gears here a little bit, and another one we worked with is with Van Tilburg's, and it is an EPA project. I'm just going to get the language right. So this is part of the Maumee Sediment and Nutrient Reduction Initiative, and the funds were awarded through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative grant. Luke Van Tilburg is here to talk about his process in this. And as you can see for them, on this farm here, this is a conservation map that they worked with the NRCS office. We have a CP33 around the bottom of the woods at the very bottom. But then these are saturated buffers that are against the creek banks with basically, what's the right word, retention pond. It collects not only the surface water, but also their tile water all runs into those and is then redistributed through a center pivot that's in the corner, which we'll see a little bit more right here. So we just pulled that map up again with AgSolver. We ran this actually after this process was kind of going in, just to get an idea of what it is. So that was last year's yield monitor information that we had. That was the previous year's. And that's kind of what it looked like when we identified those zones and removed them out and removed those potential losses. So I'm going to let Luke explain exactly the process and kind of what it was. And again, this isn't a CRP practice, but it was a conservation type practice that was used through for precision ag purposes.
Good afternoon. I'm Luke Van Tilburg. I guess basically kind of the background on this farm, it's a 150-acre farm, and basically what we did was we partnered with the Ohio EPA and Pheasants Forever to do a couple projects on the farm. So initially, your first thought might be, who in the right mind would invite the EPA onto their farm and poke around? But we kind of have a progressive look at things where we realize that something has to be done with water quality. We need to take steps in the right direction. So we want to help be part of the solution and not wait till it's mandated and things are forced upon us. And so normally, in my opinion, the government usually doesn't have the answers. So we try to work with them and come up with answers that are realistic and applicable. So that's kind of the reason we went that route. Basically, what we did was we had a 150-acre field here. The red part was already tiled and ditched, and so we installed tile on the northern part of the field. As this field lays, it actually there's a creek on the east side and a creek on the west side, so it actually is in two separate mini watersheds. naturally. So it gives us, so we installed a retention pond on the east side and a retention pond on the west side. And basically we installed all the outlet tiles then to go dump into the retention pond and not directly into the ditch. And with those retention ponds in, we have water lines coming back to our center pivot so we can reclaim that water and put it right back on into the field. So what are the studies we're doing with this? We're working with Wright State University Lake Campus, and they're going to do some water quality studies with us as well to provide some information to the EPA. So basically, kind of two big things we're looking at. The saturated buffer I'll cover in a second. First thing we're looking at then is looking at, all right, how much water when we get a rain event, and depending on what the soil moisture is, how much water is making its way into these retention ponds. We start getting an idea of being able to measure, all right, when soil moisture is this, and we get X amount of rainfall, how much water is actually making it into the stream. So we're measuring that water flow. And we can do that by collecting it in the retention ponds. So then we also want to say, all right, when were nutrients applied, and how many of those nutrients then made it to that retention pond. So we can measure the water going in, the nitrogen and phosphorus going into the retention pond, and get an idea of nutrient load. To get an idea then of, we talk about a half inch of rain or an inch of rain 24 hours before a fertilizer or manure application. Is that accurate? We can start to get a better idea of is that information accurate? So with the this process number 2 then is the saturated buffer. So for those of you that don't know what a saturated buffer is, essentially there's a grass filter strip all the way along both creeks already. But anybody who's been down a filter strip, this is a 4,000 foot long filter strip. If you've ever gone along there, you pretty much know it's 4,000 feet long. There's probably 2-3 places where the water actually comes through. It's the low ground, right? So you have that 4,000 foot long filter strip, and there's probably a risk of only 40 feet. It's actually filtering the water where the surface runs off. So what a saturated buffer does is basically using water control structures, we run a tile up along that part of the creek at basically at 0 grade, backfill it with stone about 3/4 of the way up, and then plant a filter strip on top of it. And we can use replant the filter strip right back on top of it. The idea then that we can basically use that entire filter strip, have those roots of the filter strip go down to that saturated buffer, so we can use water control structures to saturate the filter strip. So basically, instead of just 40 feet of the filter strip being used, we're now essentially saturating the entire filter strip and getting benefit from the entire grass strip there. And so that's the other thing we're going to test then is the nutrient levels or the nutrients in the water before and after the saturated buffer.
We just got some photos here of the project site. I'm going to go ahead and let Luke explain each one. But these are just harvests there at the farm. This is on a different field than what you're seeing, but it's very similar to what they're doing. And this one is actually the one adjacent to, or is it?
No, both of these fields are another field, just another field that we have that has a wetland in it back in the corner. This site, this is the actual where we installed the retention pond. Basically, we had finished installing the retention pond, and here's the pipe. Then we set a pump up then to go back towards the center pivot. So the outlet's coming into the retention pond, and the pipe going back towards the center pivot. There's one of the pumps, and then there's the water control structure that we have going out towards the saturated buffer. And there we are reseeding the grass on top of the saturated buffer.
Yep. And so that's a warm season grass thing. When we talked about the root systems, native warm season grass is 8 to 20 foot root systems, so they do it pretty good at absorbing a lot of different things and also holding bank and having very little soil erosion. And those are basically conservation seeds and putting a lot of benefit out there. There's wildlife benefits, there's the typical wildlife, but also pollinators and things like that, with the bees and the butterflies.